Welcome to another edition of the Great Lakes Divide podcast, brought to you by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Those are the sounds that you hear, and the Black Friday sales you can enjoy the day after Thanksgiving and on Saturday as well. It extends Small Business Saturday. Give them some business, local business in Lansing. That's on Washington, the east side of the street. Rio Town Marketplace, front and center, right in the front display. You walk right in and take a journey back through time. Heather Frary and her crew will help you out. Select the perfect gift for that special someone coming up. Yes, it's just about a month away, the jolly time of year, Christmas that is. And the Record Lounge is here to help you with the very latest in new vinyl and all the all-time classics that Tom Crawford and our next guest enjoy as well. Hi-fi stereo equipment. John U. Bacon, our special guest, of course, award-winning author, and he was featured in the very latest documentary on FS1, Divided We Stand. John U., thank you so much for your time, as always.
Hey, Ryan, my pleasure, of course.
Absolutely. And take us through what that documentary was like, putting it together, being a voice on there, and just what went into the production from your end.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, obviously Matt Engel and Kevin Shaw did all the heavy lifting. Those are the great producers behind it. They've done great work for BTN and others, including Fox. My job was simply to sit down and talk for 2 hours, which I do plenty of times. So at that point, of course, you have no idea what they're going to use or not use. So you always have to fit on pins and needles when you're waiting for it, because you talk for 2 hours on tape, anybody, if they want to, can make you look like a jackass. So I was thrilled that they didn't. That was good. And, of course, I thought they did a fantastic job with it. It got below the surface. It got beyond the games. It obviously focused on 07, the Dantonio era, basically, to the present. That'd be Dantonio era and the Carr, Rich Rodriguez, and Hoke and Harbaugh eras. So there's 4 coaches to their 1 during that stretch. But it was fun. I thought it was often funny, and they got a lot of great guys to help out with that story.
John, it's Tom here. You did a terrific job, and I'm sure they carved 2 hours. They whittled it down to certain amounts of stuff, and Jack Ebling was for an hour, our mutual friend and my former colleague, and. But I guess I'm going to be candid with you. I was a little disappointed. I thought it was slanted heavily to Mark Dantonio. I thought it was a Mark Dantonio coronation. I didn't like the Devin Gardner role. I thought it was he was almost like a Sparty Slappy. And to be honest with you, I'm really surprised there was no focus. They talked about Ebling talked about the fact that Michigan State hates Michigan because Michigan. Try to keep Michigan State out of the Big Ten, but there was no reference to the 1973, the infamous vote following the 10-10 tie, which was a huge part of the rivalry. So a little disappointed, even though you did a terrific job on your role.
Well, I appreciate that. Of course, of my 2 hours of blabbing on camera there, not to be using the TV show itself, and of course, you're going to get far less than that, but they use me plenty. I can't complain. But I talked a lot about the history of this rivalry, which goes back to before Michigan State actually was a school. And Michigan wanted it badly to include the agricultural college at U of M. When they didn't get it, they were ticked off, and the insults toward Michigan Agricultural College started before there were any classes. So that was that. And then, of course, as you point out, 1953, Michigan State gets into the Big Ten over Fritz Chrysler's best efforts to keep them out of the Big Ten, which, of course, they were well aware of. Michigan declares that year that they win the Paul Bunyan Trophy. They wouldn't even pick it up. Of course, they lost anyway, 14-6. But it goes on like that. And, of course, 73, Michigan State gets their revenge with the 10-10 tie vote, of course, which sent Ohio State not to the Rose Bowl over Michigan. So, I think that I would have loved to have seen them. I know time is tight, but I would have loved to have seen them spend at least 5 minutes on the history, because that gives the Dantonio era a lot more gravitas, if you will, if you know how deeply these feelings go on both sides. That, I think, is a fun thing to get into. Furthermore, of course, I think what they did do a good job of, was how it always goes back and forth. When Mike Hart says little brother, he says that after Dantonio says a moment of silence. Trust me, that got back to Ann Arbor, of course. And they were well aware of that. So in most cases, the punching back and forth has been nonstop. These are truly two brothers going at it, and whenever one of them punches the other, the first thing the other guy says is he started it. and they're usually right.
John Ubacon joining us from the Starbucks in Ann Arbor, appropriately enough. And, of course, the rivalry he describes, the backyard brotherly rivalry, is the basis for this podcast, The Great Lakes Divide. Divided We Stand was the documentary on FS1 that he was a part of course, joining Tom Crawford, yours truly, Ryan Schuling. Now, John, if Michigan State is kind of little brother, and we'll go back and forth on that, how would you describe, then, the rivalry between Michigan and Ohio State?
That is what? I guess cousins. They have far less in common. And in that sense, it is, the axis of evil is how both sides see it. That's more Cold War stuff. I guess there you go.
There.
If you got a backyard brawl, that one's the Cold War. That you don't quite come to arms, but you have the surrogates, of course, the hockey teams, the astronauts and whatnot, who fight your fights for you. But there's not a whole lot of love there between Ohio State and Michigan, whereas I got plenty of Spartan friends. You probably do too. And before Michigan State games at East Lansing or in Ann Arbor, you'll see plenty of green and blue, tailgating together in their little tents and whatnot. You almost never see that with Ohio State and Michigan. You almost never have any friends down there, and vice versa. So I do from the media, of course, and I'm sure you guys do too. But the average fan is not going to have friends down there. Or vice versa. So I think that is a far more cold-hearted rivalry in some ways. I think, though, on the grand scale, and this is a point worth making, and I think they made it, if memory serves, in Divided We Stand. The Michigan State rivalry is greatly underrated. The intensity on the field cannot be beat, and I think it deserves more national attention.
John, I think there's a huge you make some great points about the contrast in the two rivalries. I mean, what Michigan-Ohio State is, and I'm saying this, listen, I know I'm coming from a Michigan perspective here, but I very much compare it to Oklahoma and Texas, the Texas OU game. Texas is kind of like more the submissive, maybe you want to call it arrogant type of fan base who doesn't like to get into the hardcore bantering and bashing and jumping on beer cans and being abusive and dropping F-bombs and trying to beat up people. Like Ohio State, they're the abrasive NFL crowd, very much like the old Philadelphia Eagle fans at the Vet or Oakland Raider fans, and they come up here. And you'll see it Saturday. You and I will be in the box, but I mean, it's all around. They're more of an attack mode. It's just more important to them, more life and death, more get a life mentality, I think, than Michigan has. And I think that's why they'll have more fans. I mean, Michigan has virtually no fans when they go to Columbus. They don't want to put up with the physical abuse. It's almost like their fan base has intimidated the Michigan fan base out of an equal rivalry type of thing.
Well, there's some truth to that. And what I said in the previous book is that, in the current book, Overtime, here's my plug.
Yeah.
Overtime, Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines at the crossroads of college football. It's been out for 3 months, bestseller. That 10% of Ohio State fans were raised by wolves. And I've talked to friends down there, and they said that is a gross underestimation. Friends of mine who went to Ohio State. So, I mean, I recall 10, 12 years ago, more than that, I guess, President Mary C. Coleman at Michigan had to send Michigan's own police force down there to protect Michigan fans because the Columbus officers and the Ohio State officers would not do that. They'd see them get abused in front of them and do nothing. So the list there was pretty long. I mean, I'm sure there's some animosity. I see it online between Michigan State and Michigan fans. I've never seen it and at East Lansing or Ann Arbor. I'm sure it's happened, but I've just never seen it. And I've never really, heard from it directly from many of my friends on either side. So I think the fans get along a lot better between Michigan and Michigan State than Michigan and Ohio State. I will say for Ohio State fans, the 90%, they've always been very good to me. They watch BTN. So they will stop in the parking lot. I've never had a problem. Quite the opposite. They've been quite good. The 90% I know that are quite good fans, they're always apologizing to the 10% who are raised by wolves. So there's that. But on the field, man, Michigan, Ohio State, they say there's almost never any trash talking.
Oh, it's clean.
It's clean, no cheap shots, no trash talking. Michigan State, man, there's very little animosity in the tailgates. There's a whole lot on that field.
USA Today columnist, and she has Michigan ties, Christine Brennan, says the following: the Big Ten is at the vortex of so many issues in college sports, and Bacon expertly covers them all. Again, it's been out since September 3rd. That's Overtime that John, you just talked about. John U. Bacon, our guest. And again, you can follow him on Twitter for all the very latest at John U. Bacon. John, what does the U stand for?
My middle name. Good luck.
Ulysses. Oh, I got one guess. Anyway, okay, I'll follow up with this then. John, as far as this game...
Too much fun to drag it out.
I know. No, it's always going to be a mystery. I thought I'd catch you at a weak moment here on Thanksgiving.
No, I'm on guard.
9-point favorites, the Buckeyes coming in. I think that's a lot of respect shown to Michigan. I don't know that Ohio State's been favored by less than 10 in any game this season. They take to the road to face that team up north, as they like to call them. Ryan Day's not even uttering the word Michigan. The fans online through Twitter like to block out the M's with red X's. We know all that's going on right now in the lead up to this game. Ohio State leapfrogs back to 1 after LSU had jumped ahead of them to 1 following the Tigers' win over Alabama. I find both moves to be kind of quizzical, although it'll sort itself out in the wash at the very end. So, John, I turn to this question for you. As far back as you can remember this rivalry, what a win on Saturday would mean for Michigan, however you define that, for Jim Harbaugh, for the program, for as long as it's been since Michigan's beaten Ohio State, for where the Buckeyes are right now in position to make the playoff, where would it rank in your eyes?
You know what? It'd be right up there, which sounds silly on paper because Michigan is already out of the division race. Ohio State has already clinched it, so even Penn State is also out of it, and, of course, Michigan State too. So on paper, this is all about, bowl games, and only Ohio State really has Big Ten or national title hopes on the line here. And yet, my sense of it right now, given this, pretty horrible century so far for Michigan football and the Ohio State rivalry, 2-17 so far during that stretch. This might be second only to 1969, 50 years earlier, as far as setting up off the next era. And I think that if Harbaugh pulls this off and the Wolverines pull this off, I think this will resonate. You got the number one team. They're undefeated. Ryan Day's first year. And I bet at that point, this thing is back on. I mean, it's not been that far off in a lot of these games. I think it has to be the most important, maybe 95 with Lloyd Carr. When he is in his first year, they're 7-4. Ohio State is number 1. They got Eddie George, Heisman Trophy winner, all this stuff. That certainly gave Lloyd Carr a lot of breathing space. Let's give Jim a lot of breathing space, too, although I don't think he needs much with the AD Ward Manuel. But, man, it's right up there, and as crazy as it sounds, I think Michigan's got an excellent chance on Saturday, despite what you see on paper.
John, 93, 95, 96, all those 3 games, Ohio State was either 1, 2, or maybe even 3 ranked in those teams. 2 were in Ann Arbor, 1 was in Columbus. I was at all 3 of those, including the 13-9 win in Columbus in 96. And I kept thinking at that time that it was a psychological thing. It was just, Michigan was in Ohio State's mind rent-free, and they couldn't get over that. Now I feel like Michigan, has Ohio State in their head, and it's not so much a physical disparity between the two teams or coaching for that matter, and they got the home field. Do you think there's a psychological element, is that we're not supposed to be able to beat these guys, 14 out of 15 and 7 in a row?
I think that's a whole lot of it. I think that, and you hit the nail on the head there, Tom. I mean, obviously, in the time that since Tressel got to Columbus, they've had only 2 coaches until this year. So that's stability. That's excellent. Those are 2 future Hall of Fame coaches, obviously. While Michigan's had a revolving door there for a while. And you can't have sustained excellence like that, 3 and 4 year stints, obviously. So that's a big part of it, and yada, yada, yada. But I think another big chunk of it is the psychological hurdle that you mentioned. And I'm reminded of Bo in the bowl games. I think that he obviously he beat Ohio State his first time out in 69 against Woody. At that point, there's no voodoo against Ohio State. It's back and forth for 10 years. But in the case of the Rose Bowl, he missed his first one due to his first heart attack. They lose 10-3, and they keep on losing. They lose 7 straight bowl games before Bo finally wins one in 81. And then he goes 5-5. So I think that's what Harbaugh needs. He needs one. Once you win one of these things, it goes from you're not playing ghosts anymore. It's not voodoo. You're playing football. just a basic, simple, straightforward, high stakes, granted, football game. And if he does that, of course, now you're Ryan Day. Okay, great, you're 11-0, but you lost to Michigan, and now the monkey's on his back. And he did not get to carry Urban Meyer's record over, even though he's on that staff. So one win, and all of a sudden the tables are turned very quickly.
John U. Bacon joining us, of course, award-winning author, New York Times bestseller, and Overtime already in that category. Be sure to find it online, your favorite online source. Maybe a good Christmas gift idea. There, I'm pitching it for you, John U. How about that? Overtime.
Brian, I agree with you. How about that?
You don't need any help, Brian.
I'm just offering it as a good friend and compatriot.
Tom, I got news for you. I need all the help I can get.
But again, you can find it Amazon, anywhere online. Just search for John U. Bacon and Overtime. Speaking of which, John, you were, in my opinion, the foremost authority in terms of the history of Michigan football, dating back, of course, to the Bo Schembechler era and even before that. But what is your favorite Michigan-Ohio State tale, your favorite story that you've encountered across the years, and maybe one that people don't know a whole lot about, but you can fill in the details on?
I'll give you one since you asked, and I've got no prepared answer for this. But a few years ago, Mike Lantry, the old kicker, of course, from 73-74, who set all Michigan's records despite those last two games kicked, although Bo always maintained that he made the one in 74, and many would agree with that. He got together about 6 or 7 Ohio State guys and 6 or 7 Michigan guys from the Bo Woody era. We're talking about Bob Thornblade and guys like that in Michigan, talking about Archie Griffin, John Hicks at Ohio State, Tom Skladany. These are great guys and fun guys. We got together for an event, and I spoke at this event. Only about 15 of us total. Man, the respect between those guys was infinite. Dare I even say affection once the beer started getting going around. And the stories were remarkable. And you see that, and you realize, man, the downside to a rivalry like this is not, losing a bunch of games. It's not getting to be a part of it. And how many other college programs in America would love to be a part of a rivalry like Michigan and Ohio State, where every year, the nation's watching. And games you'll not forget the rest of your life. So that, to me, is one of the more fun nights I've had as a sports writer, a night I will not forget.
John, last question for me. I'm curious on this, these kind of intangible things. As I was at the 69 game following the 50 points that Ohio State served up to bump Elliott's team down in Columbus, going for 2 and all that nonsense, and Michigan just playing, just sheer will had them beat this greatest team since the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, they're saying they could be the caliber of the Minnesota Vikings. You remember or you won't remember it, but I'm older than you. But my point is this: the Greg Mattison variable. And the reactions from certain players like Carlo Kemp, Aiden Hutchinson, and the animosity, the hurt, just the frustration, even back to spring ball. How much of an emotional factor can that linger 3 hours and carry them through, or does that fade away a couple series?
In this rivalry, hell yeah, it can. I mean, look, man, the kerosene's already on there. The bonfire's been stoked. It does not take much to keep this thing burning. So I missed their comments, by the way. I saw some guys said a lot of respect and so on. But it sounds like Aiden and Carlo were upset about this. I've been traveling.
John, you said it earlier that on paper it wouldn't be a total shocker if Michigan won this game. They're just a 9-point underdog. That's a sizable upset. But in terms of stature, historically, we went through the fact that they're 2-17 Michigan in the rivalry in this millennium, you could say. Are you bold enough to pick a win, to call your shot here for Michigan over Ohio State? And to that point, what will it take? What will be the determining factor in this game if you had to narrow it down to one or two factors?
I always hesitate to do this because I hate to be called a homer and all that, so I've been pretty objective, I think, during the stretch. And in these books, hell, I got my press pass pulled, so that's objective enough for you. Yeah. But I'd say this, and I certainly have picked Michigan to lose this game many times in the last decade, and often accurately, of course. So I'd say this, and I think I can say it pretty objectively. Look, on paper, Ohio State's like 1, 2, or 3 in almost every damn stat you can find on offense or defense. It is a stunningly good Ohio State team, maybe the best I've seen in a decade, maybe better than all the teams that Urban Meyer had. This team is just steamrolling their opponents. And Ryan Day, hats off. Just brilliant job, in my opinion. And yet, somehow, I think, crazily enough, a sense I did not have certainly 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, certainly 4 years ago, and all through the Hulk and Rich Rod eras, that I think Michigan somehow has got a secret. They're going to spring out on these guys. The parallels to 69 are unmistakable. Now, how much can you weigh on that? Who knows? But, of course, Ohio State was everything in 69, and Michigan grinded the gears for the first 5 games, 3-2 at that point, and then they got their act together, second half at Minnesota, and then the steamroll teams. And that's what they're doing now. Second half of Penn State, who's played better football than Michigan since then? So in that sense, you're under the radar and probably underestimated. But I sensed a lot of confidence in the building when I was down there yesterday, and I think they really can. They're playing at home. That clearly matters for this team. Shea Patterson is playing his absolute best. What they need, if Ohio State plays their very best game, it's going to be very hard to beat. What they got to do, Michigan's got to do, is get in the backfield, get to Haskins. He might be injured, I hear, either his ankle or his hand or both. Get to him early, and Shea's got to find those receivers, and Gaddis and Harbaugh have got to have the guts to go to him. When you see Nico Collins and company get engaged, man, those guys are very, very hard to beat. So I think that, and the emotional aspect here, as Tom pointed out earlier, it's on Michigan's side, in my opinion, because Ohio State's got a lot more to lose than Michigan does. That's one aspect. Second thing is, Ohio State has not been punched in the face all season. They've not been behind in any real way all season. They have not had to go 15 rounds yet. And Michigan has had to do that a lot of times, including, to some degree, Indiana. So I think that they are more seasoned in some ways. They're tougher. And I think that their motivation is intense. So right now, I think Michigan can do this.
I like it. A bold call. And this is not a guy that's usually serving up the cornbread on Thanksgiving. And on that note, John, I hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving with your friends, your loved ones, your family. But your favorite Thanksgiving dish is?
Oh, stuffing. Stuffing with lots of gravy. And here's something else, Ryan. I'll say this. In an upset, stuffing is better than the actual turkey. The sides are better than the main course. There, I said it.
I agree.
Boom.
Totally agree.
He's got stuffing over turkey. He's got Michigan over Ohio State. We'll see if John U. Bacon proves to be prophetic. The U is not silent, and you can read more about it in Overtime. The book now currently out since September 3rd. And again, it will make a great Christmas gift for your Michigan fan loved ones out there. Follow him on Twitter at John U. Bacon, of course, New York Times best-selling author, public speaker, etc., and guest, of course, of the Great Lakes Divide podcast. John U., always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And again, happy Thanksgiving.
Ryan and Tom, always a pleasure. Let's see what happens.
And we certainly will. It'll be a high noon start coming up on Saturday, and we turn now to Tom Crawford. We'll get into a little bit more X's and O's here, Tom, as we turn the page. But your cursory glance at what John U. had to say, I thought he made a lot of good points as to why Michigan could very well win this game. Are you in agreement?
Well, yeah, I've been in agreement since halftime of the Penn State game. I said it on several podcasts. This podcast, I said it on Press Pass with Jack Eveling. From that point forward, they're going to run the table, and that means obviously a win over Ohio State and a win in the bowl game. So absolutely I have them. I have Michigan winning 28-23. I think the key element is going to be, Ryan, is getting a good jump out of the gate. In other words, they've had some notorious slow starts, even in an Indiana game, slow starts defensively. I think, just basically, get a couple 3-and-outs here and there if possible, at least get a 2-and-out on that first series. Don't give up field position on that first Ohio State possession. I think that's going to be the key element. And I've been in countless Ohio State Michigan games dating all the way back to the 60s. I haven't missed a one in Ann Arbor. And that point is this: the emotion of the crowd can ignite a defense like nothing else. It's easier to play defense with emotion than it is offense, where there's more execution involved. So I hope Michigan wins the toss and defers to the second half. I'll just lay it out that line.
So Tom has got the straight upset pick. He's taking Michigan with the 9 points and the win straight up. Final score, once again, 28-23. Tom, if I got that right?
That's correct.
All right. I have a very similar score, but I'm going to be the wet blanket here. I think Ohio State wins, but I believe this is going to be a very difficult game for them. 31-21 is my final score. They barely cover the 9. The Buckeyes, I'm picking this on the power of what I've seen with my own eyes this year. This has been an absolute diabolical team on both sides of the ball. Chase Young defensively could be one of, if not the top NFL draft pick this year. The Lions hoping to tank for him him, perhaps. And then, of course, on the offensive side of the ball, it's Justin Fields. These guys could both very much realistically be candidates to be in New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony together. Not sure how that'll all shake out, but the one thing I'll say, Tom, is going back to last week, and we discussed this, in which Ohio State had Fields in the game. He twisted and turned his ankle. We don't get injury updates in college football as to whether he's questionable or probable or doubtful or, clear to go. But I know him limping off the field with just 1 week to prepare, that's a possibility that it could be a factor. And if you're looking for any kind of window, any kind of weakness, Achilles heel, if you will, for Ohio State that has no other perceived weaknesses on their docket, that could be one. And if you see him kind of shaky out of the gate, that could be blood in the water, and Michigan could play the part of the Sharks swarming in. So I agree with you. I believe the start to this football game, maybe more than any other, between these two teams is important for one particular reason, and that is Michigan has to have the belief that they can win. Last year, they were bombed off the field. Their supposedly top-notch defense was made a mockery of by Ohio State. That was a shocker to me. Not that they lost, but how they lost. If they send an early message, and was likened by John Yoo to a 15-round boxing match. I know he's a big boxing fan like you and I are as well. If Michigan gets that first punch in the mouth to Ohio State, and they haven't been in a fight this year, not really, that could stagger them on the ropes like a champ, like Rocky Balboa against Apollo Creed, and I could see the Wolverines giving Ohio State hell for all 60 minutes. But if the Buckeyes come out, say put together an 11-play, 75-yard drive, touchdown, and quiet the crowd, that could have a dramatic impact as well. So I'm with you. I think right out of the gate, that first drive, either way it goes, matters a lot.
Well, I think the thing of that, Ohio State has not played in a tough game on the road. And part of the reason is the convenience, and this is just the way it is played out. I mean, they played Wisconsin at home. Mm-hmm. They didn't play them in Madison. I think they would have had a tougher, believe it or not, I mean, you might say 38 points. I mean, a home field's a home field. I think that would have been a lot different for Ohio State. I mean, they just haven't had that tough game on the road. They haven't had the opportunity to have a tough game because they haven't had a real formidable opponent on the road. They had Penn State at home. They had Wisconsin at home. And so I think that is another variable that people aren't even mentioning at all when you're looking at Ohio State just pummeling all these, bad teams. I'm not saying their schedule is horrible. I mean, Cincinnati's a really good team, but they had them at home. I think that is an issue that's going to be interesting to see how they handle that.
And for what it's worth, I know it doesn't mean as much this year with as much as the Spartans are struggling, but they also had Michigan State at home in Columbus and beat them 34-10. So you're right. Exactly. I think I've been there to the Horseshoe when Michigan State got absolutely curb stomped a couple of years ago. And that environment, it is just otherworldly. But the same can be said again. You're coming into Ann Arbor, the big house, the big game. And these fans, again, the belief, and this goes two ways. I think the crowd feeds off the team, and I think the team feeds off the crowd. And, Tom, you'll be there firsthand to witness this. And one of the things, and I asked this to John Yoo, and I love to tap into your experience as well, and you kind of harken back, and you kept beating this drum all year long that you're calling it. It's going to harken back to 50 years ago, almost exactly, to 1969, and how transformative that win was for Bo Schembechler, for the Wolverines football program. Those who stay will be champions. The shellacking they had taken the year before when Bump Elliott was sent out in disgrace and Woody Hayes poured salt on the wounds, and they asked him why he went for 2, and I think he said it because they couldn't go for 3 in that particular instance. So the history of this rivalry, as you recall it, between 1969 and now, you mentioned 3 of those games in the 90s, and we know how much they went Michigan's way when John Cooper was installed, and then we know how much the tide turned when Jim Tressel took over, and of course with Urban Meyer. So the scope and scale of this rivalry, what really stands out to you, Tom, as the highlights of your life in following it?
Well, the highlight was, that's why I got nostalgic on that. When I'm 13 years old and I'm seeing Michigan turn around their season halfway through. They dropped the game to Michigan State 23-12. They had gotten blown out by a really good Missouri team that was highly ranked at the time in Ann Arbor, 40-17, and they flipped the script literally halftime at the Minnesota game up in Minneapolis at the old Memorial Stadium, and just went on a roll. Very similar to this team in so many ways. It's uncanny that 1969 team is going to be in Ann Arbor, and they're going to be honored before the game or after, one of the two, and so, or during the game, as they often do. So, maybe I'm trying to play that, the history card too much. One other thing about a history element here, Ryan Schulian, I want you to focus on is that when I in 1984, I just moved back from Houston. I had missed 3 season ticket seasons as far as utilizing my season tickets. I come back, I moved back to Michigan. Jim Harbaugh is a starting quarterback. This would be his sophomore year eligibility wise, and he opens playing number 1 Miami of Florida. Bernie Kosar is the quarterback. They're number 1 in the nation. Michigan beats them 20 to 14. That is the last time that Michigan has ever beaten a number 1 team, when Jim Harbaugh was a quarterback. So there's another nostalgic little thing to throw at you.
I love it, those historic nuggets, and what a great couple of sources to have in on this discussion for the Wolverines with John U. Bacon and our own Tom Crawford. That'll be a noon start on Fox, Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor. AccuWeather forecast calling for 38 degrees and maybe some light rain. It could get ugly, and that could be good for Michigan. Ohio State a 9-point favorite. Tommy's got them 28-23, the upset of the millennium for sure if Michigan were able to get it. And, of course, I'm bringing things back down to earth with an Ohio State victory prediction, 31-21, barely covering the 9. You're listening to the Great Lakes Divide podcast with Tom Crawford. I'm Ryan Schuling. It's brought to you each and every time out by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Don't forget, great Black Friday deals await you. Just come on out, $4.96. Downtown Lansing, then head south on Washington. Yes, it's just that simple. And they've got Black Friday record store day, lots of limited vinyl, plus more Small Business Saturday. They'll have sales all day. Come support local small businesses, not just the Record Lounge, but their neighbors all around in the Rio Town marketplace as well. There's, of course, a restaurant there, barbecue, everything you could ask for. 10 to 7, they're open each day, the Record Lounge, on Friday, Black Friday, and Saturday, Small Business Saturday. Hoping to drive up their sales. Please support them because they support us, and in return, support you, our listeners. And we could not be more thankful on this Thanksgiving than we are for Heather Frary, her staff, and the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Turning the page to Michigan State and a 3:30 Eastern Time kickoff on FS1 at home to wrap it up for 2019, though they're hoping for one more game, a perfunctory bowl game for which they would get practice for a lot of their young players, especially in that offensive line that could really use it. Maryland comes to town, and this is a Maryland team that is leaking oil, to put it mildly. They have lost 6 in a row since a 48-7 win at Rutgers, which how much can you really put stock into that? They've lost every other game they've played since a 63-20 win. Somehow they got that at home over Syracuse. That includes a loss at Temple, of all things. That includes a 59-0 home loss to Penn State, a 52-10 loss on the road at Minnesota, a 73-14 loss at Ohio State. Nebraska rattled their brains in College Park just last week, 54-7. It makes Michigan's 38-7 win look rather small by comparison, but that was still a complete domination and blowout in which Maryland did not score a single offensive touchdown. They gave Indiana all the Hoosiers could handle in a 34-28 win by the Hoosiers in Maryland, but that has been about it. They've been bouncing back and forth between quarterbacks here, whether that's the starter, Josh Jackson, a redshirt junior, or Tyrell Pigrom, the other redshirt junior. Haven't got a lot of consistency out of their passing game. Jackson's passing a miserable 48.3% completion rate on the season. Pigrom not a lot better at 58.1%, but Javon Leak, a decently talented running back, 716 yards on the season, averaging almost 8 per carry with 8 touchdowns. But a Maryland defense that has been, again, like a sieve. And even Michigan State, struggling on offense as they have, should not have any problems in this game. It's a demoralized Maryland team with nothing to play for. They haven't tasted victory, as I mentioned, going back to early October. There's nothing really on the line for them at 3-8. Michigan State is playing for their Bull Lives at home. And, of course, similar weather to what we'll see down in Ann Arbor, about 37 degrees with some rainy or possibly snow-filled skies. Michigan State has gone from the opening line as a 17.5-point favorite to now 22 points. That line's been inflated by the betting margin in Vegas. So we bring back in Tom Crawford to give his opening thoughts on Michigan State. I know we've changed our tune on this one, Tom. A couple of weeks ago when MSU was just kind of twisting in the wind after getting blown out by Michigan, and before that having their guts ripped out in a 28-3 lead that they blew in a loss against Illinois. They come back, they win at Rutgers, they control the game 27-0, and just everything going right now looks to see Michigan State at least salvaging a bowl appearance this season, but by any measure that has to be categorized as an unqualified disaster for this season to finish 6-6, even if they win.
Yeah, and I'm flipping the script in terms of trying to forecast what's going to happen for Michigan State and Maryland, not because of Michigan State, but Maryland. I mean, to have Nebraska go to College Park and hang 54 on them tells me that team is checked out for this year. They're just playing this sucker out, even though they have a first-year coach, where typically things are kind of on an uptick regardless of how the wins and losses are playing. People have good attitudes. That whole honeymoon thing is still on. So Maryland has really been a head-scratcher for me, and I think they're done playing football mentally. The thing what Michigan State has to avoid, Ryan, is not get caught up in the fact that stadium's probably going to be half empty. They're going to look over there into the southeast corner and see none of their fellow students, or hardly any. Let's just be real. But it's not about the fans. It's about them. Those 85 scholarship players, the 20 walk-ons on that team, it's about them playing for each other, playing for the seniors, heading out, not that many of them, and getting that win and more practices and getting some of these young players developed. You have a coach who is committed to coming back, and it looks like he will. So that's what they got to focus on and not get caught up in the fact that there's going to be virtual no ambiance or no enthusiasm from a crowd at Spartan Stadium at 3:30 on Saturday.
And along those lines, the coach that has announced that he will return, at least as it stands right now, Mark Dantonio. Here are some highlights from his weekly press conference previewing the game against Maryland.
First of all, I just want to offer our sincere condolences to the Bulla family. Hank Bulla passed on Sunday evening and made a statement yesterday. But I think the biggest thing that I can say about Hank is that he was more than just a Spartan. He was a nationally recognized, nationally renowned college and pro football coach, and he impacted so many young people along the way. He continued to bleed green after his retirement, and I'll never forget the first day that I was in the office and I was hired. The very first day I was in the office, and Coach Bulla was still had his office there as the defensive coordinator. At that point in time, he was still in his office cleaning it out, and I came over and talked to me about retirement, actually, and but just the first in terms of the retirement system, actually. But great guy. 3 of his grandsons played for us. Obviously, I know Shane very well, and Chuck is on our staff. But our condolences and our prayers and thoughts are with he and his family.
Urban Meyer was talking about the program and the struggles lately, and he was very complimentary of you as his friendship and you as a coach, but said to him what he eyed was development of players and recruiting. Do you agree maybe that that's accurate?
Well, I have a great deal of respect for Urban Meyer, and but when you're in the thick of it here, you know a little bit more about the program here. And I've always said that, we've done a good job developing our players. I mean, Daquez Denar was a 2-star player coming out, had 0 scholarship offers, yet he becomes a first-round pick. Jack Conklin becomes a first-round pick. Trey Waynes was a 2-star player, becomes a first-round pick. So we've had guys develop within the program, and we've been able to win games along the way. We've had some different players come in that were higher recruited guys, some 4-star guys and things of that nature, and they've been able to become good players as well. But the reality of the situation is that players come, and I don't care where you're at, they got to be developed, and they grow as people. We've had, if you look at our situation this year, and right now where we're at, there's a lot of reasons, and I understand that, but the ones that are out of our control are injuries. So consequently, Consequently, we're playing young players, especially on the offensive line. I would say on our offensive line, we probably had, 11 different starters, which is not usually good. But there hasn't been stability at that position along the offensive line. So injuries, I would say some officiating decisions. I'm not going to call them wrong decisions, but they didn't go our way. I would say that our schedule, the way it was propped up, was difficult. And I would also say that we've had some drop balls and some issues in the deep part of the field with guys judging the ball. I mean, you can for sure find 2 more wins in that area. The youth of our football team is right now is on display, but I think we have good players, and I think they have a tremendous chance of developing into outstanding players, especially when you look across the board at certain positions. So, I guess I agree with part of it, but we play our way into those situations, and I also believe that success breeds confidence. So if you're successful and all of a sudden you find yourself 7-0 or 8-0 like the 2011 team, then you're much more confident going into the next game. Like the other aspect occurs as well. You start to spiral downward a little bit. You start saying, okay, what's next? I think our players have remained above that, and that's, like I said, that's been impressive. But we are where we're at. We still have a chance to have a winning season, and that's all that we can affect right now. And Maryland's up on the clock, and we're going to get ourselves ready to play against Maryland and figure everything else out after the fact. So I hope I answered the question, but I appreciate his remarks as well about me.
Mark, we see Joe obviously listed among the guys that are going to be honored on Senior Day. Was there any thought to keeping him out of that, given the reason for his suspension and the fact that his career is over?
No, I felt like I'm treating this just like an injury. We went through the appeal process on both sides of the fence in that process. I thought they did their due diligence. They took their time with it, and the decision went against us. But, if you know Joe Bocci and you know how hard he's worked and the leadership that he's shown on this football team over the course of time, I have to be respectful and honor that. I want him to be a part of that day. So he's been a great player for this program, and I hope he has a great career after. But we obviously can't play him. But we went through the process with the appeal, and just didn't win it.
Well, he famously said pride comes before the fall. The Spartans have already fallen this season. Do they have the pride to get back up and fight? They did last week. They won at Rutgers, snapping a 5-game losing skid on the season, the longest under Mark Dantonio outside of the 3-9 campaign, the nightmare from 2016. And again, a 3:30 start FS1 as Maryland comes to town, probably playing for the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit if you had to peg it at this point because of the teams that are ahead of them in the pecking order. I like to do this each week. Of course, Ohio State at the top of the list there. Minnesota would probably be second, at least at this point. We'll get into their game, a big one for the West Division title in just a moment. Right behind them, their opponent. Wisconsin, Penn State right there, Michigan, those are the top 5. Iowa, they've got a big game. They're trying to keep Nebraska out of bowl eligibility, and that'll be coming up this weekend as well. Illinois is ahead of Michigan State in the pecking order, and even though Michigan State won head-to-head, you'd have to believe that Indiana is as well, and they certainly will be if they finish the job, as they should, with a win over cross-state rival Purdue this weekend. So when you look at the totality of it for Michigan State, assuming that Nebraska loses to Iowa and stays out of the bowl picture, they would be the final Big Ten team in as the 9th team in, and that would spell Quick Lane Bowl. And almost certainly, in my estimation and projection, that could mean Florida State coming up to Detroit as well, because Florida State plays Florida, and they would also be 6-6 after what is assumed to be a loss. That would be a monumental upset if the Seminoles beat the Gators this season. Turning back now, Tom, to Michigan State and where things stand right now and what they have left to prove. You talked about the practices, the young players, the very small group of seniors heading out, one of whom won't be on the field, and that's Joe Bocci. Just how disappointing that particular recruiting class was for Michigan State. That would have been the 2016 class. All the losses, you can go Donnie Corley on down, Hunter Rison, I believe. There's a whole bunch of guys that were in that class that are no longer with the program. And just in your estimation, how much that one class set Mark Dantonio and Spartan football backward?
Well, as it ended up, I mean, at the time it looked pretty good. Yeah, it's an incredible amount of fallout. I mean, this whole season's just been mind-boggling bad for Michigan State. I mean, I had, sane people, if you will, not wearing green and white love goggles that were saying 11-1 for Michigan State. We talked about this defense was being at historic levels back to Bubba, Charlie Thornhill in the mid-'60s and all those teams. And my God, the defense finally gave out because the offense couldn't do anything. I'm telling you what, though, what epitomized this, the one takeaway from this season, the thing that just pushed it into going into a total tailspin for me was the fact your leader, Joe Bocci, the guy that everybody just went crazy about, one of the best linebackers of all time, the ultimate. And he is I've interviewed him, as I mentioned before, a great guy and all that stuff. But to let his teammates down as a leader, the PEDs, and allow that to happen when you're a leader, your senior year, that was just the dagger in this season because he's their best player, I think, on defense. And I'm a little bit surprised, Ryan. I'd like to get your thoughts on this. That Mark Dantonio's comments about Joe Bocci, his departure, he treats it like an injury. So no penalty in his mind. He's going to be doing the senior day. What are your thoughts on that? Because I don't know if I'm a Spartan fan, I don't know if I'd clap when he's introduced because of that reasons I just cited.
I have kind of been perusing the message boards, so forth, Facebook groups that are private, closed.
Yeah. What is the feedback on that?
Well, you might not be surprised to learn, Tom, that I'm not the most popular guy in there. And that is because I like to come with red-hot truth, fastballs down the middle. I don't hold back, and I don't know any other way. And I think that's one of the things I believe that you appreciate about me and that I appreciate about you is that I'm not going to blow sunshine up anybody's skirt, and I'm not going to tell somebody it's the sun shining when it's raining out. And for Joe Bocci, you just hit it, and we've talked about this, to be a leader on this team, to be a senior captain, to have all the experience in the program, to know what that program's been through on the field and off, to have seen the valleys and been to the mountaintop in 2017, to know what that took, to been through that entire journey, and yet still cut a corner, whether that was negligence, that would be the best case scenario, or if it was overt breaking of the rules that he thought he could get away with, either is unacceptable. You're a leader. You're accountable. You're responsible for your actions. And not only that, beyond that, for everybody else on that team. It's like a platoon. It's like a military unit. You're the captain. These guys look up to you. You set the standard. You set the tone. Whatever you do, whatever you say to the media, in the locker room, in practice, on the field, they look to Joe Bocci. And I can only imagine the disappointment in his teammates' faces, eyes, hearts, when that was revealed that he had been popped for PEDs. There's no way around that. In the team dynamic, if any of you out there listening have been part of a team, think about that. Best player on your team, Joe Cool, Joe Bocci, the leader, whether it was high school, I don't care what level you played. Maybe it was college. To have that guy go down on the chessboard, I mean, how do you pick up the pieces after that? This was the guy that you rallied around and rallied behind, and he said, let's go, and you're like, let's do it. You respond. He says, let's jump. You ask how high. And then he doesn't hold himself to the same standard that he's allegedly holding all of his other teammates. I don't know how you get around that if you're Mark Dantonio. And this is where I'll go back, like I said, if I was the coach, and Mark Dantonio knows far more about football and is a legend in his own right, but just from the cheap seats here, what message does this send? And what message?
The message is terrible. You know what it is? It's a message saying, listen, I'm still behind you. You're still on our team. I'm just treating it like an injury. I'm telling you what, that's the worst piece of coaching. That verbal statement he made at that press conference Tuesday, the worst piece of coaching the entire year, that statement. I'm treating it like an injury. That's bad. That's not a good message to that team and that program.
I'm glad you highlighted that because that was in our montage earlier of the takeaways from the press conference. And I was like you, Tom. I was just shaking my head and thinking, how can you say that? An injury is something that a poor young man like Felton Davis has no control over, no say in.
That's just bad luck. Yes.
And, to put that on par with a guy that made a choice, he made a decision. I can't stress this enough. And I will say that at least people have kind of either nodded their head or stayed quiet in silent agreement. Maybe, I don't know, in the Spartan fan base that's been looking for a reason to support or defend Bocce. Look, on all these products and supplements, there's an NSF seal. I've talked about this. My dad worked there. I interned there for 2 summers in Ann Arbor, ironically. And they are told, these athletes, at every level of sport, college, professional, high school, if there's a training staff involved, 2 things. 1, it's got to have that seal, period, end of sentence. 2, you got to go through us. Anything you want, we'll get it for you, but we got to make sure it clears muster. And you are not an expert on nutrition. We are. That's why we're hired by the university. That's why we're hired by Mark Dantonio, Ken Manny, Sally Nogle. That's why they're there. Joe Bocce isn't hired to do that job. So for him to take it upon himself and go rogue, there is nobody to blame but Joe Bocce. And to not hold him to account, to treat it like an injury, to let him participate in senior day as if nothing happened, nothing went wrong, you're not going to get punished, you're not going to suffer any consequences. Again, you open Pandora's box to the next guy. It's going to say, well, maybe I'll get popped, but it's worth the risk. And even if I get caught, I get to go out like a champ like Joe Bocce did. That's hogwash.
Oh, yeah, go work out. Be a student coach, still be part of the team. Absolutely. Still use facilities. It's not my program, so I'm not rolling tears over it. But if I'm a Spartan fan, I'm pretty pissed off when I hear something like that, especially from a coach who's under the microscope and has delivered one of his worst coaching performances of the year, of his career, I think.
Well said, Tom. Again, honest, accurate, fair, maybe a bit harsh, but truth hurts. Final score prediction, Michigan State, Maryland. Tom, go.
Yeah, Ryan, I don't think this game's going to be close at any portion of the game. I got Michigan State cruising in this game 35-7.
35-7, very close to what I have. I have a few more points on the board. I got the Spartans winning 38-13. Again, maybe some late kind of points. I don't know. Maryland hasn't been able to score anything against anybody, but for Michigan State's backups, let's say some seniors, little U's that rarely play, maybe they come in on defense. I'm trying to make excuses for Maryland at this point. Taking a look at the over-under, it has gone down from 52.5 to 48 as the point spread has gone up from 17.5 point favorites for the Spartans to 22. So I've got the total at 51. That is the over that hits. Tom's got it 35-7, and he'll take the under. But we both have Michigan State winning, and we both have them covering 22 points, which is the current point spread in Vegas. So we'll keep an eye on that. Again, doubleheader action this Saturday. The big game, noon, Fox, Ohio State, number 1 in all the land. Michigan, number 13. Buckeyes, 9-point favorites. Michigan Stadium there. And then in the afternoon contest, Michigan State hosting Maryland, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff. FS1 will have the coverage, so you want to flip over for that. Real quick, through the rest of the schedule, Tom, we anticipate Illinois at home, 8.5-point favorites over Northwestern, noon start FS1, that the Illini will win, finish 7-5, and go to a pretty decent bowl game, especially by their standards, Tom.
Yeah, Illinois going to be 7-5. I mean, I think it's terrific. Lovey's done a great job. I mean, I was second-guessing him going into this season. I think his team is on the uptick, and I think their fan base is starting to embrace him. So good for the Illini.
Indiana, Purdue, and again, the Hoosiers road favorites. This is a rivalry game. I think it's the old Oaken Bucket, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Yep. ESPN2, high noon, 6.5-point favorites, IU. They're 7-4, trying to get to 8-4. That might mean like an Outback Bowl. That'd be tremendous for Tom Allen. Purdue at 4-7, their season basically over. I think we both like Indiana in this game. And what that would mean, Tom, for Tom Allen to go 8-4 after we thought he was on the hot seat to start the year.
Yeah, 8-4 and a berth in the Outback Bowl or the Tax Slayer, but anything to get to Florida would be huge for that program. Another great accomplishment, and a Coach of the Year candidate. Maybe he won't get it, but if PJ wasn't around, but he's done a great job. Indiana's on the uptick as well.
Penn State at home with a bye against Rutgers. The line in that game currently at 40.5 points. We aren't even going to talk about it. Penn State will win that game. Rutgers stinks. Some interesting drama, though. I want to get your quick thought, Tom, on Greg Schiano possibly again coming back and the contract dispute there, the numbers. I mean, just how much of a train wreck is Rutgers across the board right now in Big Ten athletics?
Who would take that job? I wouldn't take it. You're just setting yourself up for failure. Greg Schiano comes out. He used to coach Rutgers, comes back and serves up this you need to do this for me list. It's laughable. They're not in a position to comply with that. I would just tell Schiano to bye-bye and just try to get somebody more tangible, get some hot coordinator as opposed to going after a big name.
Well, that'll be on BTN for those of you that want to torture yourselves. 3:30 start time there. And the 1A big game, as Ohio State, Michigan, of course, is going to command most of the attention. But this one's for the West Division title. Wisconsin, with the win on the road at Minnesota, would tie them in the standings, then win the tiebreaker head-to-head. It's a 3:30 start on ABC. The Badgers are 12th in the college football playoff rankings. Minnesota is 8th. And this is a pick'em, basically. Wisconsin, a 2.5-point road favorite. I'm surprised a little bit by that. Does experience win out here for Paul Christ over PJ Fleck, or does the home field mean something like it did for the Gophers, Tom, when their win against Penn State?
No, well, two things: experience that you just cited, and also payback. Payback for doing what Minnesota did to them at Camp Randall. They beat him by 2 or 3 touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, and they're going to pay him back. This is all new territory for Minnesota. Yeah, nice little win against Penn State. That was cool, and they've had a hell of a year. But Wisconsin, I am really confident Wisconsin's going to win this game, probably by 10 points. Okay,
I'll take the opposite side. I'll take Minnesota by a field goal to both cover and win straight up and go to Indianapolis to get their brains beaten in, most likely, by Ohio State. So that's a look at the slate of college football. Quick notes on both Michigan State and Michigan heading to tropical locales. Michigan State, of course, a bitter defeat in the opening round of the Maui Invitational against Virginia Tech that prevented them from facing Kansas. Dayton looked very solid, a team also that Michigan State didn't see. That one went to overtime before Kansas finally wins it. MSU comes back. They hold on for a win over Georgia and Tom Crean. Another individual superstar player, and Anthony Edwards goes off for 37 points against the Spartans in that game. And then just on Wednesday here to wrap things up, they get a win over UCLA, solidly played, 75-62. Cassius Winston leads all scorers with 20 points in this one. Xavier Tillman turns in 14.7 boards. Rocket Watts with 12, the other double-digit scorer. Now, Marcus Bingham started. He only played 7 minutes, however, and did not score in this one. That was an interesting turn as Thomas Kithier came in off the bench instead. Gabe Brown had the most minutes off the bench with 25. But Cassius Winston, I guess 2 points here, Tom, for you to respond to, revealing in a very touching article written by Chris Solari, Detroit Free Press, about how this grief is really coming at him in waves, as one might expect with the death of his brother. It just hits him all of a sudden. He breaks down in tears. The whole team is affected by this, and it's something they've had to overcome basically on a day-to-day basis, and that includes their time out in Hawaii where the rest of his family, his parents, his other brother Kai was there as well. Speaking to just the character, the toughness of Cassius Winston to play through that, and Michigan State coming away 2-1 from this Maui Invitational tournament with the loss of Virginia Tech and the wins over Georgia and UCLA.
Yeah, they've been looking semi-pedestrian for being a preseason number one. Michigan State we're talking about. I mean, I've watched, this is a Wednesday. This is one of my favorite weeks, and I've been watching college basketball freaking all day long. It's embarrassing how much I've watched, and because I love it. Michigan State is going to have a really, really good season, and they're as good a viable candidate to get to the Final Four, to get to Atlanta, and maybe even win the damn thing as anybody. But they don't look like they're like this super team that I thought was going to be. And obviously the tragedy that Cassius went through and the effect on that is really been, it's heart-wrenching for people to watch. But Xavier Tillman's play has really surprised me. I was expecting more of him. He doesn't finish like I thought he would. They haven't clicked yet, and maybe they'll get it all together when they play Duke, and Duke's going to be smarting coming off that embarrassing Appalachian State type loss to Stephen F. Austin. At Cameron Indoor, first time they've lost at Cameron Indoor to a non-conference team since the year 2000. That's 19 years. Yeah, it's crazy. So the luster off that game's taken off a little bit. If they can get over the Duke hump, like Michigan needs to get over the high, or they already did last year. What am I saying? But they could beat Duke. twice in the same calendar year. Whether that would be good for Michigan State. That's a big game for them Tuesday, and then we'll see more how they do moving forward.
Yeah, we'll have a preview of that game. That's next up for MSU at Breslin. Rare visit in the Big Ten ACC Challenge as the Blue Devils come to town smarting off that home loss, a stunner to Stephen F. Austin. If you didn't see the highlight of the end of that game, you'll want to dial it up and watch it. It's fun, and Schadenfreude is always enjoyable when it involves Duke. That'll be a late start on Tuesday night the 3rd, 9:30 tip-off time, ESPN, for Michigan State and Duke. We'll see how far the Blue Devils fall in the rankings and what happens to Michigan State, as they were ranked number 3, but did have that additional loss to Virginia Tech. Spartans now 5-2 on the season as we turn to the Michigan Wolverines. And they faced Iowa State today down in the Bahamas as they continue with the battle for Atlantis. 83-76 win in this one. Isaiah Livers was 17 points. He was 3 of 6 from 3, took a team-high 13 shots, and Franz Wagner playing in this one. Limited minutes, albeit, Tom, but good to see him out there and just what he adds to this team. What you thought in watching Michigan win this game?
Oh, I was really pleased with today. 10 players played, 10 players scored. And to have Franz Wagner in there, who's going to be a legitimate 3 who can give some perimeter shooting, I thought he, for his first game out, was tremendous. This is following all that discouraging press conference we talked about last time, that it sounded like this injury could be lingering, and all of a sudden he's back playing the next opportunity, at the Battle of Atlantis, game 1. So that was really good to see. Also, Austin Davis finally played a legitimate amount of time. He was in there for 7 minutes, had a bucket. They're a legitimate 10-person deep team, and they're getting a lot of attention. I mean, Jimmy Dykes said he thinks they're the best team in the Big Ten right now. I know we're sitting here in November, but I mean, they're looking pretty good right now, and they're legitimate. I mean, they're an NC2A tournament team. I don't think they're necessarily the ultimate Big Ten contender. There's Maryland, there's Ohio State, and there's Michigan State, maybe a step above. But I'm really pleased with what I saw today. It'll be interesting to see how they do as we're taping this. We're still heading into the North Carolina game, which tips off tomorrow, 1:30 on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, a nice alternative to watching the crappy Lions if you Michigan fans
you got that right.
want to do that instead. On ESPN, they'll have the coverage, 1:30 tip-off time against number 6 rated North Carolina, who just took care of Alabama, albeit in a bit of a struggle, 76-67. And then the Wolverines go from the frying pan into the fire, so to speak, Tom. They go from facing UNC to number 2 Louisville on the road next Tuesday, the same night that Michigan State plays Duke. I'll ask you this. What you think the Michigan chances are of splitting the next 2 games against UNC and Louisville?
Well, there's that, but let's look about game number 3. They're in the winners. I mean, if they lose to Carolina, they'll probably the loser of like Oregon and as we're speaking right now, yeah. Oregon and Gonzaga. So, and then they play Oregon again in December. So their schedule, which started up Cupcakeville here for gimmies at Chrysler, is all of a sudden getting really, really tough. And I like Iowa State's a step up model. That's a legitimate NC2A team. We're going to find out more about against Carolina, and then obviously in the 3rd game on Friday, and then Louisville on the road. A week from now, we're going to find out all about the Michigan Wolverines, but so far so good.
All right, yeah, I forgot that game in between, but we'll keep an eye open for that. We'll have a full recap of the Bahamas for the battle for Atlantis for Michigan in our weekend podcast, as well as a recap of Michigan, Ohio State on the gridiron, Michigan State, Maryland as well, and a preview of Michigan State, Duke. There's so much going on this Thanksgiving weekend, and we remind you to visit the Record Lounge in Rio Town, proud sponsors of this podcast. For Tom Crawford, I'm Ryan Schuling. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a happy Thanksgiving. The Record Lounge with Black Friday and Small Business Saturday sales. They'll be open 10 to 7 each day. That's in Rio Town, the Rio Town Marketplace, south on Washington from 496 in Lansing. Have a safe holiday, everybody.